Okay. Empezamos. I hope the wine was fine, the food and everything. And after this, the very brave Brisa is going to present her work. Brisa is finishing her PhD. She's been doing it in Brazil, in La Universidad Federal de Santa Catarina. And she's been with the ecology, terrestrial ecology, and yeah, she's just leaving us after 6 months. You can try. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tim. All right, this work. Okay, hello. Thanks for coming, especially today. I am Brisa Marciniak, and today I will be presenting one of the chapters of my PhD thesis that is entitled "Effect of the Elimination of an Invasive Tree on the Structure of a Plant-Frugivory Network." This chapter is a collaboration with Dr. and how this is what I'm writing here. So I will start with a brief introduction about biological invasions and ecological interactions. Hello. Here is a schematic representation of the invasion process. Okay, so species that are introduced to a new environmental they start to be called alien, non-native, introduced, it's all the same, okay? And in this process, the amount of species that are introduced need to overcome some barriers that are these barriers to, in fact, become invasive, okay? So in the new environmental, some ecological interactions that can happen with the introduced species and species that are resident to this community can help these non-native plants to overcome these barriers. One example is plant pollination, mutualisms, that can help plants to, for example, reproduce. When they establish this interaction, they can produce viable seeds that after will be dispersed. And I highlight the seed dispersal mutualisms that are especially important to the plant species, the alien plant species, overcome the environmental barriers and finally achieve new ambience and expand their distribution. So you can see that from the amount that species that are introduced, some of these can reach the invasive phase.
We don't see the.
Don't see? Okay, I will. Thank you. But I need to. Oh. Okay. Well, ecological communities, or these interactions that I am showing, can be represented by ecological networks. By ecological networks that maybe some of you are familiar with. I forgot the things. Okay. So these are communities. And here you can see the all black nodes are native species, okay, and the pink ones are the non-native plants. Okay. This here we have a community, and these links can be according to the amount of interaction these do. they can.
It is.
Well, I will. Mhm.
Yes, this one.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Now you can see. Okay. Okay, so now we have some 3 hypothetical examples of how invasive plants can integrate and reorganize ecological interactions in animal and plant ecological networks. Okay, so the first example is this. In this situation, in the early invasion situation, the invasive plant initially, that you can see here, initially entered the community by interaction with the highly generous species, here represented by this animal. So this animal can interact with a lot of plants, and this new plant environment starts and enters the community interacting with this animal. Okay, and as invasion progress of this situation, late invasion, they displace the links of some native species and become themselves the super generous species in this community, so occupying this position. Okay, in the next example, it's always the same. The invasive plant is the pink one. You can see here that we have another type of situation, the pre-invasion situation. So we don't have any invasive plant here. And we have 2 groups of species that interact most between them. And when the invasive plants arrive here, so in the post-invasion situation, invasive plants establish novel links with the resident species and connect previous isolated models that was there, and change the strength of the interactions among native species. So you can see, for example, that these species and these species were interaction a lot. And now that this is present, they don't interact so much. And the last example, we can see that in the pre-invasion situation, this native plant species is high central in the community. And in the post-invasion, the invasive plant has displaced the native species by usurping some of its links and becoming itself highly central. So the non-native species, the invasive plant, will be in this position, and this plant that before was the high central node is now here with a peripheral position in the community. Okay, this was the brief introduction. Now we can go to Bauer. This is the study area. It's a small protected area in this coastal area of Brazil in the Atlantic forest here. And sí. So this is a recent protected area, and there is a lot of invasive plants there. And last year, the park management made an invasive plant protocol, and they start to making the invasive control. One. What's happening? One of the plants is Psidium guajava. That's probably you know as guava trees. Okay, so in this protected area, there was an established population of guava, this tree, in landscape and forest areas. So every arrow here, there is one, represent one individual. So there's a lot. And you can see that They are very high, tall, yes, and probably all of them reproductive. Here it's a person. You can see the how tall. So the main aim of this work was to evaluate how the structure of frugivory interactions between birds and plant species are altered in a community invaded by Psidium guajava trees, by comparing ecological networks of bird-plant interactions before and after control of the species. Well, we expected to find this situation that I showed you before, of course, not with insects and flowers, but with birds and fruits. Okay. The data collection was made in 2 consecutive years between February and April, because it's the time interval when guava is fruiting, it's offering fruits, with the same sampling effort in both years. So we have 2 communities, one before the control of guavas, that is the unmanaged community, and one after, that is the managed community. And here you can see me observing, and this is the name of the birds. These 2 birds are eating guava, and this is eating another, this piperadunco. So between the 2 years of data collection, we performed the control of the species, and about more than 500 individuals of guava trees were eliminated. So let's do the results finally. Here are the networks, and all these, here is gray, okay, but all this, the gray nodes represent native plants, and the pink ones, the invasive plants, the non-native plants, sorry. Here you can see guava. And all the orange nodes are native birds. All the birds were native in this study. So below we have the unmanaged network, where we can clearly see that guava is present. And on top, the managed network. Here we could see some important differences. There is a lot of more, but I bring some. First, after management, we can see more bird species interacting, more plant species interacting. And so, of course, the network size was higher, with 23 more species after the guava elimination. And also the number of interactions rise. So we have more than 100 more interactions in this community. One important change that we could observe was the diversification in the diet of the birds. For example, this is Cassicus emorros, the main consumer of guava trees. So here you can see how it was very dependent on this. This species was very dependent on that. This bird performed 69 interactions, and from that 61 was with guava, so it was very dependent. And after the control, this species diversified its diet from 3 species, mostly guava, through 6 species with a more equitable distribution among the resources. But this was not a pattern just with this species. No, okay. And one interesting thing here is that we have in this area another species of Psidium, that is Psidium cattleyanum, that is native here. And it was present when guava was present and offering fruits, but the birds didn't eat it. So after the guava elimination, the birds start to eating these species of the same gender. So it probably is you can see the difference in the size of the fruit. So probably birds were eating more of these because it's more attractable. Okay, so this diversification, the diet happened to most of the birds. Okay, so from the 19 birds that happened both years, 13 diversified their diet, and 15 new bird species consumed birds just in the managed network. So we can see with that potentially more native species will be favored in this community through seed dispersal. What we hope that it's one of the objectives of the aims of a protected area to favor native plants, native species in general. So let's talk about the hypothetical examples that I showed you before. We expected that guava would be in this situation in the unmanaged network, right? Being the super generous species. But before I need to introduce you for this example, this is another way to show ecological communities from a matrix, a nested matrix. So here we have the generous species in this square. They are the species that interact with the majority of the species. For example, this animal interact with all these plants, and this plant interact with all these animals. And here we have the specific species that interact with the generous species. Just a brief introduction to explain that we expected if we find this situation, this plant would be here. So now we can look to our results. So yeah, guava is the top generous species in this community, and we can put it here. But what happened when we control the guava? So when you control the guava, native species, at least this is not native, but the 5 top generous species in this community now are native. So we can find this situation where the invasive is not more here. Okay. We also expected to find that guava was high central in the community. And to see if that's true, we performed this degree centrality. That is the number of species, of different species that the plants are interacting. So here, guava is interacting with 15 species. And it is the central node of this community. We can put it here. And after the guava control, after the invader was controlled, some native plant species become the central nodes. So we can highlight the Myrcia multiflora and Colsapoa microcarpa with a similar amount degree of the invasive plants. So we have this situation changing to this situation. Some authors suggest that identifying this, who is the central roles, can be useful to shed light in which native species are appropriate to be planted or sowed in restoration programs. And another way to see important roles in ecological networks are these: the participation coefficients and within model degree. That is called CZ values for network models. So if we have this situation, we expected to have this situation, Guava should be here, acting as a connector. So we have two models. We expected that the invasive species will be connecting the models, acting as a connector, but we didn't find it. Guava is here, acting as a peripheral. So when a species is acting as a peripheral role, they have topologically inferior role in the network. But one interesting thing is that all the species, all the plant species, had these peripheral roles in this community. So according to some authors that compared invaded and non-invaded networks, communities, in invaded networks, more than 50% of native plants can shift their roles for important roles to peripheral ones. This shows a simplification of this community by the invasion process. Well, what happens after the elimination? So after elimination, some native plants start to having some important roles in this community, one acting as connector, one almost acting as connector, and another important roles. So this pattern seems to be reversed after the elimination of guava, allowing for the emergence of relevant roles by native species. So in general, we find this. First, it was very generous. Now it's not. We could not find that, but in part, native species are having these important roles in the community, and it was very central. And now native species are with this central role. So some conclusions. Experiments carried out so far in the field seem to be promising. So we have examples with plant pollination, and we have one example with seed dispersal, and all of them seems to be promising for the removal of the invasive plants. We can see that ecosystems invaded by non-native plants are capable of recovering the structure of interactions after invader elimination. So birds can start to feeding some other things, even if they are eating a lot these invader fruits. And from an applied perspective, this data have a high potential for use as indicators for management of invasive non-native species in ecological restoration initiatives. So we can see that ecological restoration strategies can and should include the control of non-native plants that attract frugivorous animals. I don't know how it's here, but in Brazil there is people don't want to do that because they think, oh, what the birds will eat, like they can eat another things. And we hope that our study provides both theoretical and practical background for the inclusion of interaction network metrics on the monitoring of ecological restoration. Okay, so I have time, right? Okay. I need to thank you, UIB, and this is all of you for receiving me, including Anna, of course, the lab. No, I request. And this was an amazing experience, both professionally and personally. Yeah. I need to make some thanks on the CAPS, that is the TSIC from Brazil, that is who pay me, my postgraduate program, the labs that I am part of, and the institute that I am part of. I want to invite you to follow me and to follow the lab and this institute that I am part of, so you can see what we are doing there. And a special thank you to this woman that is my supervisor, that is amazing person. And this is my supervisor also, and my colleagues. And I end my presentation with this biodiversity of birds, so we can see you. And thanks for your attention.
So I okay, so I want to be intentionally provocative and say and ask whether ask why it seemed to me that in your presentation you put a higher value on a higher connectivity or a more topologically intricate, let's say, network, rather than one that was mostly based on a single species. And meaning that you said that there was value in not having this single species. There was yeah. So, but it isn't clear to me as a I don't work on network ecology. It's not clear to me that this is beneficial. Meaning, for example, it could be that the birds have easier access to food with guava, and therefore they have more progeny, and maybe they can thrive more. They have less difficulty finding food, for example. Maybe it's more nutritious, has more nutritious value. So it's not clear. I mean, even though it's clear that if you remove it, there is a complexification of the network. It's not clear to me that on ecological footing, this is better. It is always better to replace the native, the invasive species with the native.
No, this is a question that always arrives. Don't worry. When people used to like fofozoa, that we call, like, oh, we need to protect the birds. But here we are looking to a community approach. We cannot see that, oh, well, this specific bird will diminish their food access. So, okay. Do you?
Yeah, I understand.
Okay. What I'm talking is that even if non-native plant is providing food, this is not natural. Okay.
Well, I argue that is not correct.
Okay,
because there has always been in the history of the world changes in ecosystems, no? So there is adaptation, there is changes in climate, and so this is a completely natural process. Maybe the speed is not natural, but the fact that there has been a modification with time of the ecosystem is completely natural.
Yeah. Well, when you look to species, is difficult to see, but if you are talking about another thing, like a pollution, we have this protected area, and some, I don't know, they are putting trash in this protected area, putting trash. Some animals will eat, so for people, seeing this is like, oh my God, this cannot happen. Let's yeah. But when we see a plant or something alive, we usually don't see the risk that is behind this.
No, I understand. I support the thing. I'm just saying that.
Okay.
Yeah. Why is it worse? Exactly. Why is it? I mean, there must be a measure, maybe the resilience of the ecosystem or something like that, is measurably worse when you have a system like this.
Yeah.
It's okay. I think that you can see that the Psidium or guava is in the network. You have a reduction in species and interaction diversity. So if the community is much more diverse in terms of species and interactions, it will be more resilient to perform.
Is there a
Yeah.
okay, cool. Okay, that is only the first step I wanted to get. But the second one is that you showed that as soon as you remove the invasive species, the sort of almost dormant sides of the network were popping up again. And so it's sort of like it doesn't, I mean, for example, you could give a boost to the birds for a few years. And then when you remove the invasive species, you still have the underlying network links that are still there and they can resume as they were before. This is what you showed. I mean, this is
not
you
a
showed that from
before
1 year to the
situation.
other, you remove the invasive
Yeah.
species and the network reestablish itself.
Yeah, but this is not, we cannot say that this is the previous before guava situation. We cannot say that. We don't have this information of how it was before.
Maybe it was different. And
Maybe,
because of the invasive species, some of them never recovered the degradation and stuff.
yeah.
I mean, that's, I suppose.
Yeah,
So.
but it's a hypothesis, exactly. So
Yeah.
my point, I mean, I completely, I'm not against any of this.
Okay, just provoking.
No, my point is that we also need to understand what we are putting value on and whether the value that we put on things is based on a scientific evidence or not.
I have a-
support you. I had the same feeling when I was listening. But if they are quitting, why is it working?
Exactly.
I'm sure.
That was exactly my point.
Are studying that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't know why.
Yeah, but there is a interesting result. For example, I can show you. For example, here you can see that this species, this species, it start to receiving lots of interactions that was not receiving here, and it's also a non-native plant. That is avocado.
And
And this species is not invasive. So it's not a problem being non-native, it's a problem being
What-
invasive.
sure, but I still don't understand what the problem is.
Well,
I
this
see a modification of the network. I think that is,
Okay.
I mean, is clear as day.
okay, but
But I
not
don't see why the modification of the network brings a negative, is associated with a negative outcome.
this, just this.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we have a species that is so attractive, native species that also depend on the seed dispersal for birds or other animals start to not receiving interactions in this period. So in the long term, no native species will
Will
be,
evolve to get more interactions.
no. So
Well, this
Because this
is
is right.
a hypothesis. No?
Not a hypothesis, not a.
The good thing would have been to have the fitness of the species here. This is really difficult, but it's starting to be done. So the ideal thing would have been to check the fitness of the different species, the birds and the plants, and to see whether they really change. So
Yeah.
it might be if you check it, that some species, for example, this bird that is feeding on guava, maybe this bird is doing worse or not, I don't know. But maybe other species are doing much better. So then the population starts growing, so everything is more equitative in the community. So at the level of community, that would be better, but there are not that many data on fitness in networks yet, because it's very complex.
I completely understand the response.
But the data there are, they suggest that this is.
Just a curiosity, how do you think the relative abundance of ants and birds will affect this, especially because these are also two different things.
Yeah,
They may have
Yeah.
a population of birds completely independently from So I never see in this type of form the abundance. Is it because it's not important, or what is your?
No, you can use it, yes, you can use the abundance of plants and birds and see the word. We didn't make it, but.
So when you say, for example, that you took off 500 guava plants, this is a lot of plants compared to other species, or it's just was
Yes.
representative?
Yeah, you don't have this comparison,
Yeah,
it's a lot of plants.
Ah.
Yeah.
because for example, in birds, there is also individual specialization, so it's there is a lot of complexity behind it. It's
Yeah.
normally wiped out when they present only interaction.
Yeah.
Okay, so it could be.
Yeah.
it could happen.
There are a lot of limitations, but we don't have a part, well, we're not talking about limitations. No.
I was question in this regard. That is like, because this, the guajava, this guajava tree, I discovered that it's the guajava. So it was like a main species in the community, because I think it's a very important question. Because also I don't know if it could, I mean, if it is a super predominant species, it can also alter how you measure the interactions.
I know,
The way
of
that
course.
It is super, it's like everywhere, you
Mhm.
will more easily see birds eating it first. And
And
maybe
after
those
no.
interactions that you are not, it's just you missed them because you were just looking at the guayabas because they were everywhere.
Yeah,
That's also like.
but, well, this is. Well, we perform the frugivorous observations just in the trails, okay? So the population, the invasive population was like here. It was a wide range, but we were not looking just to the invasion population. We were looking for guava trees that were located here. So it was less.
But so in the networks you show that the number of interactions you measure in each one is equal.
Is equal, yeah.
Yeah,
Here.
so that
Yeah. Because the data collection was not in focal species, was the time in the trails looking to all these interactions. Always two observers. Yeah.
So you were saying it's like this management of invasive species is important for restoration of natural habitats. So, but for the long term, how likely is it that you have a reintroduction over the boundaries of your
Of course, this
area,
will happen.
and what is the implication, like, or what would you recommend how to deal with these?
Yeah, this is very tough because this protected area is inserted in a urban ecosystem. So people have guava trees in their gardens, and probably birds will there and will bring seeds to the park. It's like I don't think this control is like one time and it's okay. You need to do this forever. And I would like to highlight that this study was just in this fruiting period. So in another fruiting periods in the same location, there is another invasive plants that are offering fruits for the community.
Just wondering, like, is there another way than to kill the invasive species to restore the network? Because that's the only way, because some species are like impossible to deal with directly. I don't know, like if it's an animal that you. I don't really know.
For every species, you have one specific way to control, and it's not just one way. We have this adaptive management also, but
So what is it? Like,
For example, I used here a protocol for guava control that was developed in another environment. And in these environments, they don't regrow. And here they regrow. And I needed to go there another time to do another type of control.
Nice work. Thank you for the presentation. We found something really similar with cinnamon in a much smaller community. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think it's so attractive? So do you think it's nutritional quality, or do you think is that maybe they produce a bigger crop than the other ones?
This
Or spatial structure?
good question, because this is the theme of my whole thesis. And because probably I think that we know this species is domesticated. So this fruit is has been modified, gracias, to be more palatable, more sweet, more edible fruits in general, bigger. So I believe that this attracts more, not just people, but also animals.
So do you have any data on nutritional quality of the native plants?
No. There's few studies with the native plants there. Yeah. But I could maybe compare with this another Psidium. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask what Marcos sort of asked, is that you don't have any reference without invasion to compare the
No.
result of unmanaged.
This is
Because
one of
This is something I think we should study to see whether they really recover. They're more or less to the point they were before, but this is, in many cases, this is impossible because we don't have any pristine situation anymore.
Yeah.
But we see some changes, but then we don't know whether they are actually recovering to the point they should.
Yeah.
And when we plan, when we try to do restoration, we always have a community or something, a system that is the ideal one to which we need to go. But in this case, we don't know what is the system to which
We
need to go.
think of cutting just part of the park and compare, but it's so small that birds can
But there is no parts where there were no.
There are
invasion,
no.
But it's a urban park, so the park is managed.
It's what?
The park is managed in other kind of way, like they cut the grass or they open the.
Yeah, there is.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
There's
also the
nothing
first
else.
community is managed in a way, not the interaction with your plants, right? But I mean, in general, if you think about this environment, it could never be a pristine environment if they manage the park.
I don't know. Yeah. We can now do a long-term study to see how this is going in the long-term period, but from past we cannot go.
Do you plan to follow the interactions over the times?
I can, yeah.
Because
I need to return there to see if the guava is growing again. Now, no more questions.